The holographic message materialized in the United Nations Assembly Hall at precisely 1437 GMT, its crystalline form pulsing with alien geometries that hurt to look at directly. Ambassador Vexathul of the Dominion Collective spoke with a voice like grinding metal, each word dripping with casual arrogance. "Primitive beings of the third planet," the translation matrix rendered its speech, "your world has been catalogued and assessed. You will surrender 40% of your planetary resources annually, submit your population records for labor conscription, and accept Dominion oversight of your government structures. Compliance is not negotiable." The delegates sat in stunned silence as the hologram continued. "Your species shows marginal intelligence, but lacks the technological sophistication to resist. We have observed your crude chemical propulsion and primitive energy weapons. Amusing but irrelevant. You have 72 of your rotations to respond with acceptance." Director Kalen Voss, head of Earth's newly formed Stellar Defense Initiative, watched from the observation deck as chaos erupted. Below, representatives shouted in dozens of languages, their voices creating a cacophony of outrage and fear. Some called for immediate surrender, others for impossible resistance. But Voss remained perfectly still, his augmented neural implants all ready, calculating trajectories and timelines. The hologram flickered once more. "Refuse, and your cities will burn, your oceans will boil, your species will serve as an example to other worlds that dare defy the Dominion. This message will not be repeated." As the alien projection dissolved, leaving only the acrid smell of ozone and the taste of copper in the air, Voss activated his secure comm. "Project Lazarus is now active. Authorization Omega 77. All deep space assets prepare for immediate deployment." The Dominion had made a crucial miscalculation. Their scouts had observed humanity's public technology, the rockets that barely escaped Earth's gravity well, the nuclear weapons that seemed primitive by galactic standards, the solar panels that captured a fraction of their star's energy. They had cataloged humanity's visible achievements and found them wanting. What they hadn't detected were the 7 massive construction platforms hidden in the asteroid belt, powered by miniaturized fusion reactors and staffed by the finest engineers humanity had ever produced. They hadn't noticed the quantum communication networks that allowed instantaneous coordination across light years. They certainly hadn't discovered the weapons that had been secretly built and deployed throughout the solar system over the past 30 years. The Dominion classified species based on their apparent technological ceiling. Humanity had spent decades ensuring that ceiling appeared laughably low while building something far more dangerous in the shadows. Voss descended to the assembly floor as delegates continued their panicked deliberations. President Amara Okafor of the African Federation grabbed his arm. "Kalen, tell me we have options. Tell me we're not about to watch our children become slaves." "We have options," Voss replied quietly, "but they involve showing the galaxy exactly what humans do to bullies." 3 days later, the Dominion's response fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. 12 dreadnoughts and 40 escort vessels, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Admiral Kresvor, commanding from the flagship Eternal Dominion, opened a final communication channel. "We detect no surrender beacon. Your time has expired. Witness the price of defiance." The response came not from Earth, but from coordinates that shouldn't have contained anything more threatening than space debris. A woman's voice, calm and measured, spoke across the void. "This is Admiral Ixara Valdris of the Human Stellar Navy. You are trespassing in our star system. Leave now, or face the consequences." Kresvor's appendages rippled with amusement. The scans showed nothing. Empty space dotted with asteroids and the pathetic metal constructs the humans called space stations. "Your bluff is noted and dismissed, primitive. Prepare for obliteration." That's when humanity's true face revealed itself. The first indication that the Dominion had catastrophically underestimated their prey came when Admiral Kresvor's tactical display began registering impossible readings. Space itself seemed to be shifting. "Scanning anomaly," reported his sensor operator, a nervous Velthari whose crystalline structures were flickering with uncertainty. "Detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the system." What the Dominion fleet was witnessing was humanity's greatest achievement: active stealth technology that bent space-time around entire battle stations, rendering them invisible to conventional sensors. The empty space around them was actually populated by constructs the size of small moons, each one bristling with weapons that existed decades ahead of anything the aliens had observed from their distant surveillance. Admiral Valdris stood on the command deck of Retribution's Edge, humanity's flagship, watching the alien fleet hold position near Pluto's orbit. Her strategic implants processed thousands of variables per second, while her human intuition weighed the psychological impact of their next move. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Commander Ren Casteller from the weapons station. "All Perseus class. Rail platforms are powered and targeted. The Prometheus cannons are charging to full capacity." Valdris nodded. The Perseus platforms were humanity's answer to the age-old problem of space warfare: how to deliver devastating kinetic energy across impossible distances. Each platform could accelerate a tungsten rod to 15% of light speed, creating projectiles that carried the kinetic energy of nuclear weapons without the radioactive signature. But the Prometheus cannons represented something far more terrifying: directed energy weapons that could maintain coherent beams across astronomical distances by riding quantum-entangled particles. Each shot carried enough energy to boil away a cubic kilometer of steel in milliseconds. "Sir," whispered Kresvor's communications officer, "we're receiving structured electromagnetic emissions from multiple points throughout the system. The patterns suggest coordinated targeting solutions." The Dominion Admiral's confidence wavered for the first time in his 3-century career. His species had conquered 47 star systems through superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never encountered resistance that could coordinate across light minutes in real time. "Impossible," he growled. "Their technology level was a lie." Valdris's voice cut through their communications, somehow reaching them on frequencies that should have been scrambled. "Did you really think we'd show you our true capabilities while you watched from the outer system for 20 years? The revelation hit the Dominion command crew like a physical blow. 20 years of observation, and they had been fed carefully, crafted misinformation the entire time. Every rocket launch they had monitored was a deliberate misdirection. Every military exercise they had cataloged was theater designed to make humanity appear primitive. "You want tribute?" Valdris continued, her voice carrying across the void with terrifying calm. "Here's humanity's tribute to your empire." The attack began simultaneously from 17 different vectors. The Perseus platforms fired first, their tungsten projectiles crossing the system in mere minutes. The Dominion's point defense systems, designed to stop conventional missiles and energy weapons, were utterly unprepared for kinetic projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The escort vessel Dominion's Fist simply disappeared. One moment, it was a 2-kilometer-long instrument of conquest. The next, it was an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The kinetic energy release was so enormous that it registered as a brief artificial star on sensors throughout the solar system. "Evasive maneuvers!" Kresvor screamed, but his fleet was discovering another cruel truth about space warfare. At interplanetary distances, by the time you saw the attack, it was far too late to avoid it. The Prometheus cannons fired next, their coherent energy beams reaching across space at light speed. 3 dreadnoughts died in the first salvo, their hull armor boiling away in seconds as terawatts of directed energy carved through them like butter. But the most psychologically devastating weapon in humanity's arsenal wasn't kinetic or energy-based. It was information. "Attention Dominion Fleet," Valdris broadcast on all frequencies. You are currently being engaged by the Human Stellar Navy's 3rd Deep Space Combat Group. This represents approximately 8% of our total military capability. Your empire has cataloged our species as level 2 on the Kardashev scale. We are actually level 2.7 and climbing rapidly. The surviving Dominion vessels were now in full retreat, their formations scattered by the impossible firepower emerging from seemingly empty space. But Valdris wasn't finished with her psychological warfare. Your species conquers worlds by demonstrating superior technology. Today, you learn what it feels like to be on the other side of that equation. This is what happens when you threaten humanity's children. The demonstration was surgical and terrifying. The remaining 8 dreadnoughts found themselves being hunted by weapons they couldn't see, fired from platforms they couldn't detect, coordinated by technology they couldn't comprehend. Within 6 hours, the most powerful Dominion fleet ever, assembled in this region of space, was reduced to burning wreckage drifting through the outer system. Only one ship was allowed to escape, Krezevor's flagship, deliberately spared to carry the message back to the Dominion core worlds. The age of humanity's isolation was over. The galaxy was about to discover what Earth's children were truly capable of. The surviving crew of the Eternal Dominion limped back to Dominion space through a series of emergency hyperspace jumps, their ship's hull scarred by near misses from weapons that defied their understanding of physics. Admiral Krezevor spent the 3-week journey composing a report that he knew would either make him a hero for bringing crucial intelligence or a pariah for presiding over the most catastrophic military defeat in Dominion history. The High Command received his transmission with the kind of silence that precedes either enlightenment or execution. Supreme Overlord Nexathera, the ancient being who had ruled the Dominion for over 6 centuries, studied the tactical recordings with her Council of War. The holographic displays showed the impossible, an entire fleet of Conquest-class vessels being systematically destroyed by weapons that appeared to fire from empty space. "You're certain these readings are accurate?" she asked, her voice carrying harmonics that could shatter glass. "Triple verified, Supreme Overlord," responded military analyst Kextin, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. The kinetic projectiles were traveling at 0.15 C. The energy weapons maintained coherence across planetary distances. Their targeting coordination suggests quantum-entangled communication networks spanning their entire star system. The implications were staggering. The Dominion's conquest model relied on technological superiority. They would identify species that showed promise, monitor them from a distance, then demand tribute before their technology could mature to threatening levels. It was a system that had worked perfectly for millennia. How did we miss this? Nexthara's question was barely above a whisper, but it carried the promise of consequences for whoever had failed. Intelligence Director Vaxmol stepped forward, his crystalline carapace reflecting the harsh light of the command chamber. The humans engaged in a systematic deception campaign. Every piece of technology we observed was deliberately primitive. Their actual capabilities were hidden using what appears to be macro-scale quantum stealth technology. The revelation sent ripples of unease through the assembled commanders. A species capable of such elaborate long-term deception while secretly developing weapons decades ahead of Dominion technology represented a threat unlike anything they had encountered. But the humans weren't finished with their message. Across the galaxy, species that had submitted to Dominion rule began receiving encrypted transmissions. The broadcasts bypassed Dominion monitoring networks using quantum communication channels that their technology couldn't detect, much less intercept. On Velthar Prime, the crystalline beings who had been among the first to fall under Dominion control. The message arrived during their evening meditation cycle. Elder Cassandra felt the quantum resonance in her core structure as the transmission was decoded. "People of Velthar." The voice was unmistakably human, carrying harmonics that somehow resonated with every species' natural communication patterns. "My name is Director Kalen Voss of the Human Stellar Defense Initiative. You have lived under..." the Dominion's tribute system for 300 years. We are offering you an alternative. The message continued, laying out what seemed impossible. A species that had not only refused to pay tribute, but had actually defeated a Dominion conquest. Fleet. Technical specifications followed, fusion reactor designs that were centuries ahead of current Velthari technology, defensive systems that could protect entire star systems, weapons schematics that would make any world unconquerable. But the most important part of the message wasn't technological, it was philosophical. The Dominion maintains control through the illusion of inevitability, Voss explained. They convince each species that resistance is futile, that tribute is preferable to annihilation. But what if that's a lie? What if they can be beaten? Similar messages reached the aquatic Mordavi in their deep ocean cities, the silicon-based Zarathi in their crystal spires, and dozens of other species across the galaxy. Each transmission was carefully tailored to the recipient species' psychology and technology level, but the core message was always the same. Humanity was offering an alliance against the Dominion. The response was electric. On Gathera 4, mining, Overseer Luxandra received the transmission while inspecting tribute quotas. The moth-like Gatharan had been extracting rare minerals for the Dominion for over a century, watching their world slowly die as the aliens strip-mined their most beautiful landscapes. Within hours of receiving humanity's message, 3 mining facilities had mysteriously exploded. The Kalex, a warrior species that had been forced to supply soldiers for Dominion armies, began organizing in ways their overseers couldn't detect. Their natural telepathic abilities, previously suppressed by Dominion neural dampers, found new ways to coordinate resistance. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source: the Dominion's own vassal species. The Zeroni had served as the Dominion's primary technological developers for 2 millennia. Their genius-level intellects channeled into creating better weapons for their masters. Chief Engineer Dax Theron had spent his entire life designing systems that would make Dominion rule more efficient. The human transmission changed everything. Impossible, he whispered as he studied the technical specifications. The quantum field. Manipulators alone represented theoretical advances that his people had calculated would take another 1,000 years to achieve. Yet here were complete blueprints, freely shared with any species willing to resist. For the first time in his 4-century lifespan, Dax Theron began to dream of freedom. Throughout the galaxy, the carefully maintained order that had existed for millennia was beginning to crack. The Dominion had ruled through fear and technological superiority, but humanity had just proven that both could be overcome. The question now was whether the scattered resistance movements could coordinate before. The Dominion brought its full military might to bear, because while humanity had won the first battle, the war was just beginning, and the Dominion had resources that could scour entire star systems from existence. Supreme Overlord Nexthara stood before the assembled Grand Fleet, her massive form, casting shadows across the command deck of the Infinite Conquest. Around her, 300 of the Dominion's most powerful warships prepared for what would either be the final demonstration of their supremacy or the beginning of their end. "The human infestation has spread beyond their pathetic star system," she announced, her voice resonating through quantum communicators to every ship in the fleet. 17 worlds have ceased tribute payments. Mining operations on 12 colonies have been sabotaged. Our vassal species are demonstrating independence. The last word carried enough venom to corrode hull metal. Independence was not a concept the Dominion tolerated. We will travel to their system and demonstrate the price of defiance, not just to them, but to every species watching from across the galaxy. The humans will burn, their worlds will be cracked, and their rebellion will become a cautionary tale told in whispers for the next 1,000 years. Meanwhile, in Earth's solar system, Admiral Valdris faced challenges that weapons alone couldn't solve. The quantum communication network was carrying desperate pleas for help from worlds light years away, but humanity's stellar navy, while technologically superior, was numerically insignificant compared to the Dominion's vast armadas. "Status report," she called as she entered the Strategic Command Center buried deep within Ceres Station. Commander Lyrics Torvin, humanity's finest military strategist, looked up from a holographic display showing the galaxy's political situation. 63 species have made contact requesting alliance. 47 have active resistance movements. But, Admiral, the numbers are still impossible. Even if we armed every rebel faction with our best technology, the Dominion has fleet assets in the millions. Valdris nodded grimly. Then we don't fight them fleet to fleet. We fight them the way humans have always fought superior forces, with asymmetric warfare and superior tactics. The plan that emerged from the next 72 hours of continuous strategy sessions was audacious beyond measure. Instead of attempting to defend specific worlds, humanity would strike at what the Dominion valued most: their economic infrastructure and their image of invincibility. Operation Prometheus Chain began with the simultaneous appearance of human strike forces in 7 different star systems. Each force consisted of only 3 ships, but those ships carried weapons that could cripple infrastructure across entire worlds. At the Velthar mining complex, the human stealth cruiser Invisible Hand materialized from quantum fold space directly above the primary ore processing station. Captain Ezrix Valdane, Valdris's younger brother, studied the massive facility that had been extracting tribute from the crystalline beings for 3 centuries. "Target the central power matrix," he ordered. "Surgical strike. Disable their ability to process ore, but leave the Velthari districts untouched." The Prometheus beam that lanced down from orbit was precise beyond anything the Dominion had ever achieved. It carved through the processing facility's defenses like they were made of paper, but stopped exactly at the boundaries of the civilian areas. Within minutes, 300 years of tribute extraction capability was reduced to molten slag. Similar strikes occurred across the galaxy. Tribute collection stations were destroyed, military supply depots were vaporized, and communication relays were systematically eliminated. But most importantly, every strike was accompanied by the same message broadcast on all frequencies. "This is the human stellar navy. Your Dominion overlords told you that resistance was futile. They lied. Fight back, and we will stand with you." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Species that had submitted to Dominion rule for centuries watched their tribute infrastructure burn while their oppressors proved helpless to stop it. The humans weren't just winning, they were making it look easy. But the Dominion's response was swift and merciless. On Calax Prime, the warrior species that had begun organizing resistance found their cities burning under orbital bombardment. Supreme Overlord Nex Thara personally oversaw the pacification, her grand fleet reducing population centers to glass. "Let this be a lesson," she broadcast to the surviving Calax, "to any who would follow the human example. Your would-be allies are light years away and cannot protect you. We are here, we are everywhere, and we are eternal." The massacre worked exactly as intended. Several species that had been preparing to revolt immediately ceased their activities. The human alliance suddenly seemed less attractive when the price was the annihilation of entire worlds. But humanity had anticipated this response. Admiral Valdris appeared on quantum networks across the galaxy, her image carrying an authority that seemed to burn through the void itself. "People of the galaxy, you have seen what the Dominion does to those who resist. You have also seen what we do to those who oppress. But you haven't yet seen what happens when humanity gets truly angry." The demonstration that followed would be talked about in military academies for millennia. The Dominion Grand Fleet, 300 ships strong, was approaching the human solar system when they encountered something that their sensors initially dismissed as a navigation error. Space itself seemed to be wrong. Massive gravitic distortions detected, reported the fleet's chief scientist. It's as if the fabric of space-time has been modified. What they were seeing was humanity's ultimate weapon, an artificial wormhole network that allowed instantaneous travel between any 2 points in the galaxy. The technology had taken 60 years to develop and required the energy output of entire stars to maintain, but it solved the fundamental problem of interstellar warfare, the tyranny of distance. Attention Dominion Fleet, Admiral Valdris's voice reached them from impossible directions. You are entering a Terran defense zone. Your presence here constitutes an act of war against humanity and our allies. Withdraw immediately. Supreme Overlord Nexithara's response was predictable. We are the Dominion. We bow to no one, least of all primitives who hide behind impossible technology. All ships advance to attack formation. That's when the humans showed them exactly how impossible their technology had become. The wormhole network activated, and suddenly the space around the Dominion fleet was filled with human warships that had traveled instantaneously from staging areas across the galaxy. But more than that, emerging from the wormholes came ships crewed by Velthari, by Kalex, by Zeroni, and dozens of other species. The rebellion had become a revolution, and it was armed with humanity's finest weapons. The Battle of Sol began, not with a single devastating strike, but with 1,000 smaller impossibilities that shattered the Dominion's understanding of warfare itself. Supreme Overlord Nexthara watched her tactical displays with growing horror as the space around her. Grand fleet filled with vessels that shouldn't exist. Velthari crystal ships that bent light around their hulls, Kalex battle barges armed with human Prometheus cannons, Zeroni dreadnoughts powered by fusion cores that burned hotter than stars. How? She whispered, her ancient voice cracking for the first time in centuries. How did they coordinate this? The answer came from an unexpected source. Chief Engineer Dax Theron, who had served the Dominion faithfully for 400 years, appeared on the fleet's communication channels. But he was no longer transmitting from a Dominion facility. He stood on the bridge of a massive construction platform that sensors couldn't properly classify. Supreme Overlord, he said, his words carrying none of the deference she had grown accustomed to. Allow me to introduce you to the Nexus Foundry. For the past 6 months, we have been mass-producing human weapons and distributing them to every species willing to fight for their freedom. The revelation was staggering. The Dominion's own chief engineer had turned the most advanced manufacturing facility in the galaxy into a rebellion supply depot. Worse, he had done it using Dominion resources, redirecting materials that were supposed to build conquest fleets into weapons that would destroy them. But the true scope of humanity's strategy was only beginning to reveal itself. Admiral Valdris stood on the bridge of Retribution's edge, now leading a combined fleet of over 800 vessels representing 43 different species. The diversity of the Alliance was breathtaking, creatures of crystal and metal, beings of pure energy, silicon-based life forms that communicated through quantum harmonics. All ships, she broadcast across the Coalition fleet. Remember, we're not just fighting for victory today. We're fighting to prove that oppression can be overcome, that freedom is worth any sacrifice. Show them what united worlds can accomplish. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for generations. The Dominion fleet, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the desperate fury of a cornered predator. Their ships were individually more powerful than most of the Coalition vessels, and their crews had centuries of experience in conquest warfare. But they had never faced an enemy that could coordinate across light years in real time, share tactical data instantly, and adapt to changing battlefield conditions with the speed of thought. The human quantum communication network allowed the Coalition fleet to function as a single organism. When Dominion forces concentrated their fire on Velthari crystal ships, Kalex warriors would instantly adjust their formation to provide cover. When the enemy attempted flanking maneuvers, Zeroni vessels would already be in position to intercept. Captain Ezrix Valdane, commanding the Stealth Division, struck at the heart of Dominion command structure. The Invisible Hand and her sister ships materialized inside the enemy formation, their presence undetected until Prometheus beams began carving through dreadnought armor. "Target their command vessels," he ordered. "Cut off the head, and the body dies." But the Dominion had one final card to play, a weapon so terrible that they had never before needed to deploy it. Supreme Overlord Nexathera activated the Infinite Conquest's planetary siege array, a weapon system designed to crack the crusts of entire worlds. "If we cannot rule," she announced, "then no one will. Target the third planet. Reduce it to cosmic dust." The siege array began charging, drawing power from the ship's core reactor and 3 auxiliary fusion plants. The energy buildup was so massive that it registered on sensors throughout the solar system. Earth itself would be destroyed in less than 10 minutes. That's when humanity revealed why they had called themselves a stellar navy rather than a space force. The sun, Sol itself, suddenly flared with artificial brilliance. Massive energy collectors that had been hidden in solar orbit for decades began redirecting the star's output into a coherent beam weapon of unimaginable power. "You want to see what happens when you threaten our world?" Admiral Valdris's voice carried a cold fury that made the void itself seem to freeze. "Let us show you what we do with our star." The solar lance that struck the Infinite Conquest carried the focused energy of Earth's sun. The Dominion flagship, a vessel that had conquered dozens of star systems, simply ceased to exist. The energy release was so enormous that it briefly created a new source of light visible from the outer planets. With their supreme leader dead and their command structure shattered, the surviving Dominion vessels found themselves facing a choice that their species had never contemplated: surrender or annihilation. Most chose surrender, but across the galaxy, the revolution was just beginning. On worlds that had paid tribute for centuries, populations rose up against their Dominion overseers. Mining facilities burned, tribute collection centers were overrun, and the carefully maintained order that had existed for millennia began to collapse. The Velthari, who had been among the first to submit, were now among the first to achieve complete freedom. Elder Kissandra stood in the ruins of the Tribute Administration Center on Velthar Prime, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of pure joy. "For 300 years, we told ourselves that freedom was impossible," she said to the assembled crowd. "The humans have shown us that the only thing impossible was our own fear." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. The Mordavi emerged from their ocean depths for the first time in centuries, their aquatic cities no longer hidden from their oppressors. The Zerathi built new crystal spires that reached toward the stars rather than burrowing underground in fear. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The galaxy had spent millennia accepting that technological superiority granted the right to rule. Humanity had proven that technology was just a tool. It was the will to resist that truly mattered. Director Kalen Voss, now serving as Earth's first galactic ambassador, addressed the newly formed coalition of free worlds from the floor of what had once been the Dominion Senate. Today marks the end of tribute, the end of forced labor, the end of species being conquered simply because they can be. The galaxy belongs to all of us, not just the strongest, but all of us working together. The applause that followed came from beings of 100 different species, their voices, harmonics, and quantum resonances combining into something that had never been heard before, the sound of a free galaxy celebrating itself. 3 years after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy had transformed in ways that even humanity's planners hadn't anticipated. The former Dominion territories had reorganized into the Coalition of Free Worlds, a loose confederation that guaranteed each species' right to self-determination while providing mutual defense against any future threats. Admiral Valdris stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic station orbiting New Geneva Prime, watching the construction of the galaxy's first multi-species research facility. Velthari crystal architects worked alongside human engineers, while Zeroni technicians integrated quantum computing systems designed by former Dominion slaves who were now free citizens. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice belonged to Dex Kira, the former Supreme Overlord's strategic advisor who had defected during the final days of the war. The tall, elegant being had become one of the Coalition's most effective mediators, using her intimate knowledge of galactic politics to prevent conflicts before they could start. "It's a beginning," Valdris replied. "But beginnings are fragile. Things?" She was right to be cautious. The fall of the Dominion had created power vacuums throughout the galaxy, and not all species were handling their newfound freedom responsibly. Some worlds had descended into civil wars as old grievances surfaced. Others had attempted to establish their own mini-empires, forcing the Coalition to intervene militarily. The most serious challenge came from an unexpected source: the Dominion itself. The surviving Dominion leadership had retreated to their core worlds, where they were attempting to rebuild their military strength using a new ideology. Instead of technological superiority, they now preached species purity and genetic supremacy. Their new leader, Overlord Kethmoran, had begun recruiting from species that felt they deserved to rule others. Intelligence reports indicate they're developing bioweapons, Director Voss explained during the Coalition Council's emergency session. Viruses designed to target specific genetic markers. They're planning to eliminate entire species rather than conquer them. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Conquest was one thing. It at least left the conquered alive. Genocide was something entirely different. But humanity had learned from their victory against the original Dominion. This time, they wouldn't wait for the enemy to strike first. Operation Starfall began with the simultaneous deployment of human coalition task forces to 17 Dominion research facilities. But these weren't the surgical strikes of the previous war. This was something more systematic: the complete dismantling of the Dominion's ability to wage biological warfare. Captain Ezrix Valdane, now commanding the heavy cruiser Freedom's Price, led the assault on the primary bioweapons facility orbiting Dominion Prime. What they found there would haunt the survivors for generations. "Dear gods," whispered Lieutenant Ren Casteller as they explored the facility's laboratories. They were planning to sterilize entire star systems. The Dominion's new strategy was revealed in all its horrific detail. Rather than the relatively clean conquest warfare of the past, they had developed weapons that would cause species to simply stop reproducing. Worlds would die slowly, their populations aging into extinction, while the Dominion waited to claim. "Empty planets! Burn it all," Valdane ordered. "Every sample, every research file, every piece of equipment. Nothing that can create this horror can be allowed to survive." The destruction of the bioweapons facility sent a clear message to what remained of the Dominion. There were lines that could not be crossed, actions that would bring the full weight of the Coalition down upon them, but the real victory wasn't military. It was what happened next. Overlord Kethmoran, facing the complete destruction of his research capabilities and the defection of several key species who had been horrified by the genocide plans, made one final desperate gambit. He challenged Admiral Valdris to single combat, with the fate of his remaining territories hanging in the balance. It was an ancient tradition among warrior species, leaders settling disputes through personal combat rather than risking the lives of their followers. Valdris accepted, not because she believed in the tradition, but because she understood its psychological impact. The duel took place on a neutral world, broadcast across the galaxy to billions of beings. It wasn't about weapons or technology. Both combatants were limited to basic energy swords and personal shields. It was about will, about the fundamental question of whether might made right. Kethmoran was a formidable opponent, enhanced by centuries of genetic modification and cybernetic implants. His species had bred for war, and he personally had killed dozens of opponents in formal combat. But Valdris had something he lacked, the knowledge that she was fighting not just for victory, but for the right of every being in the galaxy to determine their own fate. The duel lasted 7 hours, watched by an estimated 12 billion sentient beings across hundreds of worlds. When it ended, with Kethmoran's surrender after Valdris disarmed him in a move that left him helpless but alive, the psychological impact was immediate and decisive. "I yield," the former overlord said, his voice carrying across the galaxy. "The age of the Dominion is over." The remaining Dominion territories began surrendering within days. Some requested immediate integration into the coalition. Others asked for independence with guarantees of non-interference. A few requested human aid in establishing democratic governments. All requests were granted. 5 years after the first tribute demand, the galaxy had achieved something that most species had thought impossible: genuine peace between former enemies. The Dominion core worlds became productive coalition members, their technological expertise channeled into exploration and scientific advancement rather than conquest. Admiral Valdris, now approaching her 60th birthday, stood once again in the observation deck of the diplomatic station. But this time, she wasn't alone. Representatives from over 200 species worked together in the facility below, planning joint missions to explore the galaxy beyond the former Dominion boundaries. "Any regrets?" asked Captain Valdane, who had joined her for the ceremony, marking the 5th anniversary of liberation. "Just one," she replied, "that it took so long for someone to say no." The ceremony itself was simple. A moment of silence for those who had died fighting for freedom, followed by the lighting of the memorial flame that would burn in memory of all who had suffered under oppression. But the real celebration was what came after, the announcement of humanity's next great project. Today, we begin construction of the first interstellar exploration ships designed by free beings for free beings, Director Voss announced to the assembled delegates. "Our goal is not conquest, not tribute, not empire. Our goal is to meet whatever lies beyond our current borders as equals, offering friendship and cooperation rather than submission." The applause that followed wasn't just from humans or their closest allies. It came from former Dominion species, from beings who had once been enemies, from creatures who only years before had considered themselves the galaxy's natural rulers. They were applauding not just humanity's announcement, but the fundamental idea that had made it possible, that the galaxy belonged to all of them, and that